The problem is that moral relativism is the first step toward a kind of moral anarchy, as each person is free to decide good and evil for themselves, which, of course, in the story that we live by right here, is a story that goes far back far earlier than the 1960s and French intellectuals, to the Garden of Eden itself, where the primal temptation in the story to Adam and to Eve is to redefine good and evil based on the desire in their heart and the voice in their head, rather than on what God said was good and evil, in order to seize autonomy from God and to become your own God. Like, this is the primal temptation underneath all of the other temptations for every generation, for every culture, for every ethnicity, and so on. Many people, the result of this kind of moral anarchy at an external level, when you read the news, is the culture wars and the kind of political, tribal, violence at a literal level now. At an internal level, a lot closer to home, is an epidemic of anxiety and depression and mental health. There is so much pain and suffering across our generation. Most people in the West, on both the left and the right now, and an increasing number of young Christians, in particular in cities like ours, live by a moral code that, simplified, basically says, follow your heart. Your inner kind of intuitions, feelings, and desires will tell you right from wrong and guide you to a happy life, with the one caveat of, quote, as long as it doesn't harm anybody. Now, this is like moral relativism at a, slogan level of you do you, or be true to yourself, or follow your heart, or whatever. The problem with follow your heart is it assumes that your heart is an accurate barometer to the good life, that it's trustworthy. Not that it is a mixed bag of good desires, but also evil one, of goodness and image of God, and of the ruin of Satan's sin and death, that it's not full of contradictory and complex desires that live in an odd kind of hierarchy and ecosystem, that it's not warped not only by sin and the enemy, but easily manipulated by advertising and politicians and social media. And the problem with as long as it doesn't harm anybody, which sounds great at first, the problem is that harm requires the knowledge of good and evil, as does love. To love someone, by Jesus' definition of love, which is not tolerance, he would never define love that way, though he was very kind, and it's not kindness per se, and it's definitely not feeling nice, warm, fuzzy emotions. Jesus' definition of love, he said, greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends, or even to love your enemy. For Jesus, to love is to will the good of another ahead of yourself, no matter the cost to yourself. The problem is that to love, to will the good of another, requires the knowledge of what is good for them. Easy case study in postmodern ethics. If one of my 3 wonderful children came to me and said, Dad, I want to do heroin, even my farthest left secular friends, whom I adore, would all say, you say absolutely not, no way, because we agree that hard drugs are bad for children and adults, just to clarify. But what if one of them came to me and said, Dad, I think I'm a girl in a boy's body? Or Dad, I want to have sex with my boyfriend? Or Dad, I want to smoke pot. All of my college roommate friends are doing it. What do I do as a dad? How do I love them? Because that's the goal, right? And not harm them. Well, the problem is, in order to love them or harm them, I need knowledge of good and evil. I need knowledge of what is good for them. Our new building was recently tagged with the slogan, Love is Love, which is a common slogan in town and a fascinating case study in postmodern ethics. But again, the problem is love, harm, hate, all require a transcendent source of moral authority, which is exactly what the West does not have. 300 years of the best secular thought, and this is not me, this is most people would say this, has utterly failed to produce a transcendent moral authority. Many scientists do not even believe right now in free will and argue we're just synapses firing in response to our environment. Science cannot tell us what is, it can tell us what is, it cannot tell us how to live, nor can it give us a basis for human rights. Leading experts warn that we are heading toward a human rights crisis because secularism has no metaphysical grounding. Yuval Harari, one of the leading atheists of our day, the author of *Sapiens*, has called human rights a, quote, Christian myth. Now, I'm not saying that the secular passion for human rights is bad. I share it. I'm saying it's just not intellectually incongruent. You don't get from we evolved from apes by killing off the weak in a tribal war for dominance to Black Lives Matter. You get to racial justice from Genesis chapter 1. All human beings are created in the image of God, full stop. We are the first society in the history of the world to attempt to live with no sacred order or transcendent moral authority beyond the self, which is the new kind of not sacred, but secular locus point of authority. In a previous era, it was thought fitting to never deny God. In our era, it is thought fitting to never deny yourself. The social fragmentation, an emotional epidemic of anxiety and rage are likely signs that our attempts to create utopia apart from God, or even a society of equality and justice and happiness apart from God, are unlikely to succeed.